Okay, we're live. Welcome back, everyone. So today we are going to tackle the specific question, is Facebook a monopoly, right? We're going to delve into the case, and I'm going to give you my analysis and my interpretation of the real problem with Facebook's business model, right? So my channel is about unwinding the clickbait headlines on economic news. And I, as an economist, want to give you some clarity, give you a chance to kind of step back and see the big picture and help you understand what's really happening with the economy in general. So today, we're going to talk about the specific case of Facebook because I think there's a lot to be learned in terms of how to analyze a business model and how a potential monopoly can have an impact on the rest of us and the economy in general. So before we get into that, I wanted to mention I live stream every Wednesday night, Sunday afternoons, Pacific Standard Time. And this coming Saturday, I'm going to be talking about the case with Amazon using algorithms to manage its delivery drivers. And it's not only Amazon. More and more of us are being managed by algorithms as opposed to actual people. And I wanted to tease out exactly what that means for the workplace, for companies, and for the economy in general. And then on Sunday, I'm going to be talking about the housing market. Right now, we all know it's running hot, but some of the preliminary data that's out there is indicating that the market might finally be starting to cool down, right? So we'll look into the data and settle the question: is the housing market finally starting to cool? Is it reaching a turning point? But anyway, so that's for Saturday and that's for Sunday. Now let's dive into the question about Facebook. And first, we're going to start by watching this. I think it's a funny video of of Mark Zuckerberg being questioned about Facebook's revenue model or how they make money. Right, the senator really doesn't understand, and Mark's response is classic. Not that it was so great, not that I thought it was so eloquent, but his delivery was like a robot, quite frankly. And so I think it's important first to understand the front and center exactly how Facebook makes money. We all understand it, but let's take a look at this video. Okay. Okay. I want to pause here just for a second because what Mark Zuckerberg said was very important and very revealing. In the previous testimony, I don't have the transcript with me, but he probably said something along the lines of, yes, Facebook will always be free, right? But now he's saying there's a version of Facebook that will always be free. So there's a potential for a fee-based model. But more than that, he's giving some kind of corporate motto speech about how we want to connect people. But the important part of that comment really has to do with the fact that they want to offer Facebook at a price that's affordable for everybody. Now, I want you to keep that in mind. We'll continue watching the video, but that particular phrase is going to be very, very important to how we understand the monopoly case. All right, so let's go on. Okay, So let's all agree that was a very awkward exchange. They've got a rather elderly senator who doesn't quite understand Facebook. I'm not sure if he even uses it. And then we've got Zuckerberg, who's an IT guy, very, very sharp, obviously very successful, but rather robotic in his presentation. And you could see when he was asked, how does Facebook make money? You could see his eyes blinking. And I think there was a sense that he's wondering, how could anybody be so unaware, uninformed as to even ask this question? I mean, how else do we do it? We run ads, right? So I thought that was funny, but of course, the case against Facebook is not a laughing matter because monopolies have grave consequences for our economy. And let's just take a quick look at the case that the FTC is making against Facebook. So we need to just do a quick brief overview about the nature of their complaint, and then we'll start breaking down Facebook's revenue model and their business structure. And we're going to answer the question about the whole monopoly thing. So first, let's take a look at the complaint from the FTC, right? So I'm going to make this as large as possible. So the FTC sues Facebook for illegal monopolization. There's no need for us to get into all the legal niceties and the legal language and stuff, but basically it's broken down into anti-competitive acquisitions and anti-competitive platform conduct. So basically what it's saying is when Facebook the first point is when Facebook encounters a company that might be a potential competitor, it simply buys them out, right? It absorbs that because of its huge market power and the cash flow that it has. And the second thing is that because Facebook is so dominant in terms of the social media, that they have the negotiating leverage to force third-party software developers to accommodate it to its rules. And by rules, we're talking about programming interfaces, APIs. And so Facebook allows that kind of connection by third-party application only on the condition that they refrain from developing competing functionalities and from connecting with or promoting other social networks, right? So Facebook is, in essence, is leveraging their market power, the enormous market share they have, in order to force either companies to sell to them, or for third-party software developers to say, well, you can, we'll develop products, but we're not gonna. We agree that we're not going to compete with the functionalities of Facebook. And not only that, the third-party vendors are not allowed to promote any other social network, right? And that's regarded by the FTC as being anti-competitive. I think you can make a case for that, but as it turns out, their case, in fact, was thrown out in court, right? And let's take a look at exactly what happened, right? Again, we're not going to get into all the legalese because I'm not a legal expert, and I'm only looking at it from the viewpoint of an economist. But let's take a look. So it's talking about how Facebook has now become a $1 trillion company. That's a lot of money, obviously. And the question is, does that kind of valuation give Facebook monopoly status? And the article goes on saying, Mark Zuckerberg must have gone home with a smile on his face last night after two antitrust cases against Facebook were dismissed, followed by the company's market cap increasing to $1 trillion for the first time. So this lawsuit was filed by the FTC and 46 state attorney generals, filing 2 antitrust lawsuits. And they're objecting to Facebook's acquisition of Instagram, WhatsApp, which I think I use that. I think everybody uses that. And their statement is that our aim is to roll back Facebook's anti-competitive conduct and restore competition so that innovation and free competition can thrive, right? So why was the case, in fact, thrown out, right? Now, the judge is basically saying the FTC has failed to plead enough facts to plausibly establish a necessary element of all of its Section 2 claims, namely that Facebook has monopoly power in the market for personal social networking services. The complaint contains nothing on the score save the naked allegation that the company has had and still has a dominant share of that market in excess of 60%, right? Okay, so what's going on here is obviously the judge is looking at it from a legal perspective and saying, the specific arguments made by the plaintiffs, the FTC, and the state attorneys were not strong enough, in his opinion, in his legal opinion, to argue that Facebook is a monopoly. Now, I personally think that it's a little bit of an absurd, judgment, really. And we're going to look at specific data to make the case that whether or not Facebook meets the technical legal definition, or maybe even the technical economic model of a monopoly, it has extraordinary market power, and specifically extraordinary market power to set price. Remember, I was talking about in the interview that Mark Zuckerberg's answer about how much it charges users, and talks about a reasonable, accessible fee to its users. And that's very relevant to this case right here. So let's take a look at some market data that's available. This is from PC Magazine. I believe that to be a trustworthy source, and they're actually quoting a study where Statistica, obviously a research company. Oh, sorry, I'm going to have to, I should be sharing the screen here. Statistica asked 5,047 online consumers their social media usage habits as part of its global consumer survey. So, so let me put that here. So the data shows that Facebook is the most popular platform, with 73% of respondents saying they use the service. YouTube comes in second. That's funny because, obviously I'm on YouTube right now, with 64% saying they use the video platform. And take a look at these numbers right here. Facebook, 73%, YouTube, 64%, Facebook Messenger, 49%, Instagram, 48%. So basically, we both know that Messenger and Instagram is owned by Facebook. So not only do they have 70% of the usage of social media users, I mean, they also have 49%, 48%. So the top three, one of the top, among the top 4 social media platforms, with the exception of YouTube, Facebook owns everything. So let's look at the quote right here. The company doesn't just have the most popular platform, it also owns 3 of the top 4. Facebook, Messenger, and Instagram are used by 49% and 48%. You saw that. And it goes on to say, in between all the other platforms, including Twitter, Pinterest, Snapchat, LinkedIn, Reddit, but if not for YouTube, Facebook would own all of the most popular social media services. Now, this is the author saying, how is this not considered a monopoly? But we don't really have to get so much into. I'm going to leave this chart up here so that it's pretty obvious what's happening. We don't have to get too much into the legal aspect, but to my mind, when a media company has such leverage on the social media market, social media platforms, that is able to dictate, the prices that it charges, right? Not only for itself, but also for other potential companies, then it is acting like a monopoly, right? And we're going to get further into the problems of of monopoly. We're going to define what is a monopoly, why is it such an issue for a free market economy, and why the FTC is making this case, right? But you can see in this chart, Facebook is the dominant presence in social media. There's simply no doubt about that. The market power that it wields is not in doubt, right? So then the question becomes, is that enough to define a monopoly? So the next question is, let's take a look at what actually do we mean by a monopoly, right? And so my favorite, Investotopia, gives us a definition. A monopoly refers to when a company and its product offerings dominate a sector or industry. Does that sound familiar? Now, let me just make this a little bit bigger. When a company and its product offerings dominate a sector or industry, the term monopoly is often used to describe an entity that has total or near total control of a market. Well, we saw just now, based on actual survey market data, that Facebook owns 3 of the top 4 social media companies in the world, right? Is that dominant? I think it is. It is. It has massive market power to move users and set prices. And of course, the question of pricing is really the key to the problem of Facebook. And we're going to get into that, but reading further into the definition, monopolies can result from extreme free market capitalism in that absent any restriction or restraints, a single company or group becomes large enough to own all or nearly all of the market for a particular type of product or service. So this is part of the rationale, if you're wondering, as to why the FTC files lawsuits against what it perceives as a monopoly, because their intention, and you can criticize them in terms of how effective they are, but officially their intention is to encourage development of innovation and free competition. And clearly a monopoly is opposed to that, right? In fact, in its case, it's telling people that Facebook is stifling competition by buying competitors, outright buy them out, or in terms of software developers and their ability to innovate and compete against Facebook. They're explicitly prohibited from developing competing products or doing any kind of promotion for other social networks, right? Now, you could say, well, that's on Facebook's platform. They own their platform. They're a private company. They're allowed to set the rules, right? And in most cases, as an economist, we would agree. Most economists would agree that private property rights prevail in most cases, except in the case of a company attaining monopoly power, monopoly status in the market, right? Because now that power has tipped in the other direction Previously, private property rights are endowed because uh, your ability to make profit encourages you to innovate, encourages you to build up business, encourages you to hire employees, and that's to the good of everybody. That's the positive side of a free market capitalist society, right? We all agree on that. But in this case, Facebook may be stifling competition, and that's the case that has been brought by the FTC and the state attorney generals, right? So that's the kind of a dry definition of a monopoly, but we need to be more specific in terms of what's really happening with Facebook and why they're such a threat. And so let me bring this chart to your attention. Okay, I'm going to move it up a little bit, or I got to size it so that you can see exactly what's going on. Okay, let me briefly explain what this chart shows. Now, I know this is a little bit technical, but bear with me because this is very relevant to the discussion, and we're only going to touch on this briefly, right? And this might look complicated, but it's not. So on the left side, you see the chart shows perfect competition, and we are seeing a very typical supply and demand curve, right? There's an increase in supply, decrease in demand, and there is a market equilibrium price. Well, price, marginal cost in this chart, it's the same thing. And this is the type of market transaction that people think of when they think about the economy, right? It's not always perfect competition, but there's competition. And so supply and demand is regulated by price signals. But in the case of a monopoly, right, that supply curve is gone, right? Now, why is that? Why, in the case of a monopoly, why would a supply curve be gone? Because there's only one supplier, right? You're not competing against everybody. And so the only question that is faced by a monopoly is relative to the amount of demand that's out there, right? How much quantity do I need to produce to maximize my profit, right? Because even in a monopoly, you can't charge $1 million to everybody, right? They don't have that money, right? So you start by jacking up the price. You start low and you start jacking up the price. And as you jack up the price, more people are going to be unable to afford your goods or services, right? To the point where the price reaches a threshold where beyond that, it's counterintuitive for the monopoly to produce less and charge more, because now you're losing money, right? The degree to which people are dropping out of being able to afford your product or services is exceeding the profit that you get from increasing the price, right? And so after all that said, to sum it up for the layman, right? Just understanding in basic principles, what the FTC is saying is that Facebook has so much market power that they don't face this kind of competition. There is no real supply and demand curve on their part. They are basically a monopoly, and all they really need concern themselves with is how do we expand our user base and figure out the price that maximizes our profit. Remember in the interview that we saw at the very beginning, right? Zuckerberg was talking about the type of revenue model, which is, okay, is it, Senator, we run ads, right? It's self-evident, right? He couldn't believe the senator didn't understand. He was kind of shocked. But his other statement was even more revealing, which is there's always going to be a version of Facebook that is, that will always be free. And there might be, some other version that's charged with, I guess there won't be as many ads or no ads depending on the pricing. And so he's talking in essence like a monopolist. He's acting as if he is in charge of regulating the price, right? Um, that mentality is actually quite revealing, right? So let me bring over just sorry about that. This is okay. That didn't work. So sorry about that. Bear with me. I had the image prepared, but it's not coming up. So here we go. Okay. Again, my apologies. That was a little technical snafu there, but as we were discussing, right? And this is the problem of price signals, right? In a typical free market transaction, the balance between a shortage and excess is regulated by price signals, right? But we saw in the monopoly model, right? They don't face this supply and demand curve. They don't face this pricing signal, right? They simply determine the price themselves, right? And if that's the case, then Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook is in a position to dictate price. Now, I'm sure if other economists listen to this, they'll say you're grossly oversimplifying the issue. But I'm explaining in terms of plain English. Um, you saw an interview that Mark Zuckerberg is acting as if it's simply a matter of him deciding that there's going to be a free version, there's going to be a $20 per month version, there's going to be a $30 per month version. Now, I actually think that a monthly fee service for Facebook would actually be a very good idea. And I'm going to explain why, because the version of Facebook that we have is deeply problematic, and it has specifically to do with price signals, right? This is why I want to talk about, this price signal thing, because let me give you an example. And this goes to the heart of the matter, right? This is the real problem with Facebook, irrespective of whether they have met the technical definition of monopoly or they simply have the market power to act like a monopoly. The real problem with Facebook goes like this, right? There are other monopolies that you encounter in your daily life. For example, I have a utility company, which is also a monopoly, right? And every month they send me a bill saying, for the power that we provided last month, let's say in May, we charged you $80, right? So they are a regulated monopoly. But here's the thing. I know how much that they're charging for their services, right? And that goes directly to the whole question of pricing signals, you know, that still regulates shortage and excess, right? Even though the power company is a monopoly, if they start charging, let's say $200, $300, $600 a month, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to start shutting off the power, right? In response to the increased price signal, right? And you saw in the monopoly curve right here, right? Right here, um, that even though they don't face a supply curve, right? Even though they can decide how much to produce. It doesn't mean that they can raise the prices indefinitely to infinite, right? Because I got to tell you, if I get a $600 utility bill, I'm gonna freak out. I'm gonna start shutting off everything, and I did actually. One time, I actually I got a $600 utility bill, and after that I stopped turning on the AC. The problem was the AC. So now I don't turn it on. It's super hot right now. I know we're all going through a heat wave, but guess what? I still refuse to turn on the AC because I'm not going to pay $600 a month, right? It's simply too much, right? Now, consider the case of pricing signals in Facebook, right? If you're a user of Facebook, do they send you a bill saying last month, we mined your data and that was worth $60 to us. We made $60 ad revenue because we sold that data to small businesses for advertising, right? As Mark Zuckerberg said, we run ads, right? And so there's the old saying on Facebook that you are the product, right? But that's not quite right. That is not quite right. What they're selling is your usage data. What they're selling is your personal statistics. What they're selling is your privacy, right? And I'm not necessarily saying that it's evil, it's bad. They're a evil corporation because you signed that form, right? But let's be clear about this, right? If the local utility company sends me a bill for $600, I know there's a problem here, right? But do you, as a typical user of Facebook, do you know how much they quote unquote charge? For example, do you know the value of the personal data that you're handing over to Facebook? I'm going to guess no. You don't, do you? Right? And you know, uh, in my analysis of the situation about the whole monopoly question, it's not so much that Facebook has monopoly power or has a dominating market presence because the data itself is pretty clear. The answer is yes, right? I'll leave it to the court to decide whether the exact legal language as per the antitrust laws are met by Facebook. I'm talking from the perspective of an economist who's looking at supply and demand curves, who's looking at the function of price signals in the market. And I'm looking at Facebook and I'm thinking, what are the price signals to the consumers of their service, right? If you were to ask me, how much value did I hand over to Facebook in the last year, 2 years, 5 years that I've been using? I have no idea. There's no way for me to quantify that. I certainly don't have access to the data. I certainly would have a hard time even calculating the market value. Now, I'll bet Facebook does know. I bet they do know. Now, on a per user basis, that might be not that high. Is it 20 cents? Is it $2? Is it $30? The whole point is that we don't know. And the real problem with Facebook is the lack of transparency about that price, the price that we're paying for the usage of Facebook. If you found out, for example, that Facebook generated $2,000 worth of ad revenue based on your personal data, it's probably too high. But what I'm saying as an example, how would you feel about Facebook as a company? How would you feel about their revenue model, right? Because that's exactly what they're doing. They're taking your personal data, they're selling it, and you found out Facebook sent you a bill that said, thanks Carl, based on your personal data, we were able to sell it to advertisers, and we made $2,000. I might want to share that. I might say, hey, you know what, Facebook, you're ripping me off. Or maybe it's only 20 cents and I wouldn't care. The problem is that we don't know, right? If my utility company sends me a bill for $600, I know what to do, right? I'm going to alter my behavior so that, I'm not hit with a $600 bill. But if Facebook makes $600 or $2,000 off of your personal data, you have no idea that it's happening. You have no idea that anything is going on. All you know is that, your friend such and such, so and so, Wendy is having a birthday party this Saturday, and you better not be late, right? So what I'm saying is the real problem with the Facebook and a lot of social media companies is the non-transparency of the price signals, right? I don't care if they're a monopoly because there are lots of monopolies that are natural monopolies. There's a reason why they're monopolies, and it's not an evil thing. They're regulated by the company. I'm sorry, they're regulated by the state government or federal government, and they function. They have a useful role and a function in society. But what about these social media companies, right? We don't know the value that they're extracting from us, right? And that lack of transparency, I would argue, is their real business model. The fact that they don't provide this data to you is the real problem. Otherwise, we could make a rational decision about our interaction and our participation on Facebook. If you found out that they extracted $2,000 worth of revenue from you, you might actually reduce um, your time on Facebook, or possibly go to another social network, or maybe try to negotiate with Facebook. Some kind of class action lawsuit. Believe I would say that if that data was available, there would be a reaction from users, right? And so that's my analysis, right? Let the courts and the FTC worry about whether it's a monopoly or not a monopoly. We as consumers, and even as small businesses that advertise on Facebook, right? The lack of transparency is the real problem for us as consumers, as a society, right? So that's my thoughts on the Facebook. It's a problem of price signal transparency, right? Anyways, I hope you found that interesting. And like I said, on Saturday, I'm going to be talking about the challenge of the algorithm boss. Having algorithms monitor you and determine whether you're fired or hired or whatnot. The quality of life in the workplace is being mathematically calculated, and what that means for workers and for the economy. And then on Sunday, I'm going to talk about the initial signals that may be indicating that we're heading for a cooling of the housing market. So until then, I'll see you at the next video.